The video. Audio is good.
The audio is on the video channel.
Cool. Hi everyone. Welcome to the final of the LSE Open. I'm going to skip speaker pronouns. Please refer to my panel as a whole. If I can get a photo that will use themselves to my left.
Hi, I'm going to take away this here.
Hi, Vladimir.
So if I can go around the rooms and your name, your speaking order, preferred pronouns if you want to, in OOT.
Jack,
Oh,
sorry, this is I can change.
oh, okay. I already was ahead.
All right.
Hi, Naomi speaking first here today.
Harish speaks second of preference.
CG.
Aaron, second today.
Sio.
Taha speaking first.
I'm gonna use Stanley like to make the sound at 1 and at 6. Please overview the viewers in between that. Unless there are any questions, without any further ado, welcome Prime Minister.
Again, what instructions?
It's rats. No, our common rats are good. No. Eat rats.
Rounds like cats, so it's fine.
Bigger panel, sorry. We think that this motion allows animals basic rights, rights to self-defense, rights to be able to lobby for things like basic other rights for themselves, like not being killed, ending things like the level of meat-based culture that we have, the industrial murder. More broadly, we think that this leads to more effective lobbying for specific policies, rather than the sort of inability that we currently have to aggregate the preferences of these beings that we cannot currently speak to. We think that you have advocacy groups on our side. We think it's the main way through which that they're able to get like sort of political capital. We think countries may at some point decide to give them voting rights if they so choose. We are ambivalent on that within government. We think currently we give rights to humans and we justify that based on a couple of things. Firstly, we justify that based on cognitive primacy. We're able to say that we are smarter than animals, that we are able to outsmart animals all the time, and that there are many examples of that. And people naturally believe into that more broadly outside of the sphere of debating without significant amounts of analysis. But we also think that humans are able to lobby and explain things based on speech and give politicians and those in power ideas of the ways in which things that they might do will affect humans positively. We think currently it's very easy to ignore animals because they're not a particular voting issue, because we don't have a good idea of what they actually want themselves. We think the metric for the debate then is that then how do we lead to better rights for animals and clearer ways of aggregating preferences? Given on those two things, we would similarly afford rights to animals that we afford to humans, because we remove the ability of, we give them the ability to have cognitive equivalence, and we give them the power of speech. Firstly, status quo. On an industrial scale, we commit violence on animals regularly, whether that is through murdering them through the meat trade, whether that is through climate change, whether that is through mass deforestation. Currently humans use cognitive superiority, A, to justify this, but also B, just to like hunt animals and lure and trick them into doing things and then killing them. We think that insofar as on-side government, we are giving animals an ability to defend themselves against those basic tactics that humans use in order to murder them. We think it is a useful way of giving them a basic right to self-defense that we afford to literally every other group of beings on the planet. And we think that this A, gives animals the ability to fight back and resist in the way that we let people do that, independent of outcome. We give people rights to self-defense, even if that doesn't lead to them being defended better. But also we think that this means that they can literally just overcome basic traits that like poachers and hunters use against them on a fairly regular basis. And we think that insofar that we do that, that gives animals better rights in that there are more of them alive to then experience the rights that we then later give them. Sure.
You now also have consciousness. Worst case, you can now consciously experience pain, suffering, abuse, mass slavery, history of critical racial drama.
Yeah. Many of them cognitively experience that already to a degree. We now give them, yes, an increase in that cognitive ability to experience it, but an ability to speak about that and then have more effective advocacy and lobby groups, which I'm going to come on to now. If you can speak, you can tell us that you feel pain. You can describe what deforestation looks like. You can explain what the needs are of your particular animal group in a particular space in a particular period of time. Currently, you can't do that, which means we have to intuit what that pain might feel like. And because we can't imagine that level of pain, we do it pretty poorly. We can't understand the needs of animals that live a life radically different from any life of humans. And as such, cannot implement or think of policies that meaningfully benefit the lives of animals in the long run, further than just like, we shouldn't do a deforestation, or we shouldn't or think about the ways in which climate change affects on sort of migration patterns and what the impacts of those might be on certain animals. We think that it's harder, we think that on the status quo, people mentally justify to themselves like not supporting animal rights, not supporting the betterment of the lives of animals, specifically because, no thank you, that they can't understand these things. We think that the point at which animals can say, I am suffering in these ways, these are the sort of things that are happening to us. It is harder for people to say, oh, I'm not aware about this, because they're saying it. And there's lots of animals. There's more animals than people. There's more animals in this country. There are people on the planet. Like I think at that point you just have much less of a ability to justify as a voting population of humans the policies that we currently inflict upon animals. So that's why speech leads to or reduces the current hurdles that we have in achieving animal rights. What do we think this lobbying then ends up looking like? Firstly, no thank you. In exactly the ways just explained, you can start to appeal to reason, you can start to overcome those hurdles. But even if you don't overcome those hurdles and just achieve like blanket change writ large, I think what you're able to do as an animal or as animals is be able to say, actually, this particular policy is not very useful to us. What we want is a very different, specific kind of policy. I appreciate that this is quite vague, partly because I am not an animal and therefore can't think of the policies themselves and exactly why we need this motion. But also, I think the point at which you can have just basic preference aggregation in the way that we believe with all democratic rights that we afford to all beings that we agree are of the same equivalent speech and cognitive functions as set out at the start of the speech. We think that in doing that, you afford the same rights to animals because there is no barrier in order to do so. But even if there is no change in the outcome, but just change in the sort of terms of the cognizance, we think that speech gives them the power to have more effective advocacy groups for a couple of reasons. Firstly, those advocacy groups have fewer barriers, no thank you, in front of them, as sort of laid out earlier as to how we remove those barriers. But also you're able to give those advocacy groups more of a direction of where you want to go and move them into a place where they are more effective allies to the cause of animal rights by being able to say these are the particular things that they want. We think when you give allyship actual direction, that's when it becomes much more impactful. When you just say to allies, we want good things, I think allies are not particularly effective at understanding what those good things are and therefore are less able to sort of advocate for actual specific actionable policies that work within the system of government that we currently have. I think at this point towards the end of the debate, the challenge for OP is in a work like, given we currently don't give sufficient rights to animals, given the mass state violence that they and violence that they face globally, why is giving them the same level of criteria that we currently give humans rights to a thing that we should avoid doing? And I think that if they answer that question, then maybe they can take it over us, but absent that, opening definitely.
Am I good to start? Also, I prefer nonverbal POIs. Let's think about the last thing that humankind did when people said, stop oppressing us, but we wanted their resources. It was colonialism. The most immoral thing that humankind can do is to make billions of beings aware of their own oppression. I'm going to talk about two things in this speech. Firstly, why animals are still subjugated, but it is worse for them to be aware of their own subjugation. And then secondly, why this will pose a danger to humans and society. Why are animals still likely to be subjugated? Two reasons. Firstly, the largest threat to the majority of animals are nature and other animals rather than humans. This is firstly because most animals live in areas of the world that are not populated by humans. Therefore, humans cannot physically pose a danger. There are still massive degrees of barren land in the world because they're simply uninhabited. But secondly, only a small percentage of these species of animals are actually domesticated. Chickens and cows are a tiny fraction relative to considerations of lions, tigers, and billions of insects that are living in the wild. Therefore, they need to be mindful of their prey, of people going after them, and of the physical threats of nature, like natural disasters that can disrupt their habitat. So even if they're able to make humans better, they still oppress one another to much higher exponents. Secondly, though, humans will still have both the incentive and the capacity to subjugate animals. The incentive here is very clear. We like the food, they are tasty, they're often a large and cheaper source of calories and other alternatives as it stands. We also have massive developmental interests to still disrupt their habitat. Powerful business lobbies still want to join stolen to build on their land. Crucially, we also have the capacity to oppress them as well. This is not a this house prefers a world motion. It is about a policy that we're going to do tomorrow. Humans currently still have a massive asymmetry of additional technological prowess relative to animals. We have guns, we have tanks, we have machines. Even if they try and engage in organized resistance, we will functionally have the ability to quell that. Crucially, then, even if animals try and articulate their interests, say, oh no, we are being oppressed, we can do the exact thing that Prime Minister says happens under the status quo of rationalizing the fact that we are oppressing them. We can otherize them. They look different to us. They're fundamentally inferior. But given that animals need to operate based on predator and prey chains and they eat other animals, when we can see a lion articulate their thoughts and see a smaller animal and be like, oh, I want to eat you, we're just going to think that they're functionally like savages, that their primary thing that they do is just are wild, they go after other people and they eat them, and therefore we can rationalize to ourselves that it is justified to oppress them because we can still see them as being inferior to us in the exact same way that we did for colonialism. I think how this manifests then is that we see animals as being part of the Hobbesian state of nature. Humans are functionally the state, and crucially, even if animals do try and advocate for their rights, we can use the exact same divide and conquer tactics that we used during colonialism. The presumption of the opening government case is that animals have uniform interests toward one another. This is absolutely not true. Some animals are threatened by humans, some are not. Animals live in different habitats. They benefit from things like different weather conditions. They need different rights and they need different protections. Therefore, you're not going to get the mass-scale coalitions that OG is talking about. But I think that what can also happen is that animals can be like, we will give the lion certain protections if you agree not to cooperate with the tigers, meaning that you give some species of animals rights, things at the expense of other animals in order to actually prevent having unified collective action. So even if some animals end up getting rights, this is zero sum relative to the kind of things that other animals end up getting. Meaning that even if some animals are treated better, the vast majority of animals are still going to be oppressed. The active harm, though, that you commit is that given that the majority of animals are still going to be subjugated, you know, make them aware of their own subjugation. So we acknowledge that under the status quo, animals have the ability to feel pain, but the ability to feel the physical sensation of pain is often something that is fleeting, especially because it only occurs in death, like when your head is being chopped off, whereas the ability to have human level intelligence and rationalize that pain is substantially worse. This manifests in a few ways. Firstly, huge degrees of fear and anxiety at the impending thought of your predator going after you, and also the impending thought that you might still die and that you might still be killed by a human. Secondly, the ability to compare your relative state of life to other beings. I think it is horrible for an ant to be like, oh my gosh, look at all the humans, look at all the more powerful species, but I'm never going to be able to achieve all the things that they do because I simply lack the physical capacity to be able to do that at the end of the day. Thirdly, feelings of loss. Like if the baby calf is still being killed by a human and you're like, oh my God, my child had literally died, that is a huge degree of emotional pain. Fourthly, feelings of nihilism, knowing that you are still a second-class citizen, that my life is meaningless because I'm still being instrumentalized to being eaten, and I have no true function within the state of nature. This is so key because even if closing government is going to run some like weird principle shit about animals are people and they deserve rights, they're not functionally people under the status quo because they lack one of the most core elements of personhood. They lack the ability to be self-reflective and cognizant of their own condition, and therefore they're not morally equivalent to people. But given Tan's facial expression that they are going to run that, I also think that even if they are morally equivalent to people, the ability to articulate your interest is not something that is an inherent good. Active having the ability for other people and other humans to listen to that articulation of your own interest at the end of the day. Therefore, even if you are people, you're unlikely to be treated by people and therefore ought not be aware of your own subjugation. But we're going to talk about our second argument, Miri.
Look, looking at the numbers of humans, saying that we only farm a subspecies is kind of like saying it's okay if we only oppress transgender people and people with like you under 80, because all of the other subspecies.
Okay, if 1% of animals are better, but 99% of animals are tiny insects that live in the wild, are now going to be fucking miserable on a sheer utilitarian basis. There are more animals living in the wild who are absolutely miserable. How can this pose a danger to humans in society? Firstly, certain animals now have the ability to engage in higher degrees of conquest. We think that the vast majority of animals are substantially too weak, but like the big bears and the lions and tigers, not really the animals that we even eat under the status quo, do still exist. I think it's plausible that they will have a better and easier ability to attack humans, and also an easier ability to attack other animals. And they may want to attack humans. They can be greedy, they can find them to be a threat, they can want to amass territories, they can be angry at humans for hunting them and for attacking their animal brothers. This can manifest in a couple ways. Firstly, they can directly attack humans themselves. They're literally having a bunch of lions and tigers going into village and like destroying them, and therefore having small civil wars break out between animal and human populations. But I think it's secondly, more importantly, this is likely to further disrupt food chains as well. Why? Because this further imbalances predator and prey relationships. If lions have an easier ability to communicate with one another about going after their prey, you're going to distort the ability for larger species to more quickly eradicate the populations of smaller species, given that they are still hungry, they find animals tasty, and they want higher degrees of food. This is crucial because it's likely to have trickle-down effects on the entirety of the food chain that's going to exist and disrupt entire ecological systems. Animals often have key functions that exist within nature. Things like bees are key to pollination. They often interact with nature and tree species. So if you unbalance a delicate ecosystem that is literally developed over generations, this can also lead to massive degrees of environmental damage. The final thing here is that even if animals advocate to stop being eaten, that is probably a bad thing. There are massive shifts toward vegetarianism and a reduction of animal cruelty under the status quo. Firstly, it is being framed as an environmental issue. Secondly, groups make moral arguments on their behalf. And thirdly, there's an increased availability of alternative. So there's a positive trend under the status quo where animals are being eaten less and treated better. The distinction is that certain communities are still dependent on animals to be eaten because they are often cheaper, and certain communities lack alternative. Beyond meat is not something that's universal, and it probably won't be for generations. Even if they end up getting legislation to protect animal cruelty, this comes at a trade-off of the self-interest of humans who are currently cognizant, who currently can experience pain. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to stand in opening opposition.
I think a lot of my speech wasn't even.
Oh, look, it's really fast. Yeah, well, it's fast. So I can't read. I know I'm Irish, but I can't read basic words. But if you removed it, maybe I would be able to.
What's that of the art? More equitable behavior. There's a monkey break.
Just wait. Yeah, maybe. Okay, all right. The TLDR of the last speech you just heard, that is, by the logic that they've given, we would remove the cognizance of Uyghur Muslims because they cannot actively solve the situation that they are in, that they live in oppression, and therefore we should remove, if the technology existed, their ability to understand what was happening to them, their ability to verbalize what was happening to them, and their ability to ultimately have some level of self-defense. That gives you 3 points that go unresponded to because they just wanted to pretend they were going to respond to whatever pit they think Tin is going to run. 2 things on this. First of all, I think the level of self-defense argument, she said, not you, I think you're great, Mary. And the level of self-defense argument is quite important in this debate. Why? First of all, the issue of colonialism wasn't just that the Irish, the Indians, and the rest of the fucking world didn't understand what the English were doing to us. It was that the sadness and oppression that colonialism imposes on people is one element of feeling that those who are colonized feel. It still means that those individuals can experience joy, hope, interaction, give words to the feelings that they are feeling, and that the pain and suffering that they have is something that they can understand and come together to articulate and change. I think the really interesting thing here is The ability to verbalize, not yet, the ability to verbalize the oppression that you are having is the first step in, first of all, being able to understand what that oppression is, to then change it. Jack gives you mechanisms as to why it is likely or not likely that there would be levels of advocacy groups that at the point where animals were able to stand up and say the pain that they were feeling, there would be both emotional reasons that humans would give them those rights to lobby or its ability to lobby, but equally just reasons that it's easier for humans, right? If we can understand why lions get aggressive when they're, I don't know, scared, we can help them with that, less aggression, less people dying of lion attacks in certain areas, insert the animal that kills more people in your area for those problems. If you can understand why your cat is like doing weird things at home and not having to pay countless vet bills to get them diagnosed, rather they can just say, I have a pain in my side, it's a lot easier. If you can find a dog on the street and they can tell you, oh, I live on the other side of London, could you just help me get back there? We don't have to kill them in the streets and slaughter them. Actually, the amount of money we spend protecting animals because we just don't fucking understand what's wrong with them would be massively resolved. But on the principle shit, because I feel like that's where this debate is going to be more focused. Two things. Naomi just goes through this idea that we're going to think they're savages, that we like to eat them, that they're tasty, that we have guns, tanks, and machines. The English had guns, tanks, and machines. By that logic, if the Irish were tasty, Naomi, do you think it was legit for them to just eat us and have that forever? Like, I just don't think that that's sufficient. I know you are yourself a vegetarian, but like, Jesus fucking Christ, like, replace the word animal with human, and your point is if you're tasty and I have a gun, I get to eat you. Like, I think that's the point when you can actually verbalize. Like, at the point where a human has to go and shoot something and they can look it in the eye and say, hey, I have 3 kids and I actually like, maybe they tell a joke, maybe they do something, and you don't want to shoot an innocent creature in the face anymore, it becomes a lot more likely that you do get these rights. Maybe certain animals are savages because we've put them in a position where they are caged, where they are hunted, where they are starving, where they have no food. When you lock men in prisons in the United States and give them no fucking treatment like humans, they begin to act like savages, as do animals. But when you give people the understanding of their feelings, of their emotions, when you give them the ability to act like a human, speak like a human, think like a human, they are far less likely to be savages. Some will still be savages. Some humans are fucking savages. We don't remove their ability to think. We don't remove their ability to speak. We work with them. We work on them. And we have to share this planet with these animals. The best way to do it is in a one in which we can understand each other. I will rant about pain for 3 minutes because you all piss me off the way you think you need to be able to have a degree to understand fucking pain, but I will take closing first.
Animals currently operate on instinct, so they take what they need. Now they're going to operate on reason and they're going to take what they want. How does that change stuff?
Okay, cool. Humans used to also interact on the same way, right? Hunter-gatherers went based on need, right? We used to grab berries because it went on need. We learned that certain berries poisoned us. We reasoned that we shouldn't take them anymore. We developed societies because we realized that that made us safer. We interacted with each other. We stopped hurting each other because we realized if I hurt you now, you might hurt me later. If I hurt you now, you won't protect me later. If your point is they'll take things on what they want, they will also want to not be hunted. They will also want to not live in fear. They will also want to not live a life of pain, meaning they're more likely to work with us than against us. Yes, there might still be systems in which some animals are weaker than others. Some humans are weaker than others, but we still try and improve them. By the same logic, we don't just remove cognizance of people who are disabled and feel pain on every basis. Pain on an everyday basis. Okay, we know animals feel pain. We know it impacts them. We see behavioral changes when they are hurt. We see them crying. We see that in the same way with humans, regardless of if you are able to articulate, we still give pain medication to humans who are in a coma because pain is your muscular and nervous system reacting to pain sources within your body. It is not a cognitive process. The only addition opening opposition can give to this is to say, oh, if I can understand my pain, I add more fear and anxiety onto it. More fear and more anxiety does not mean that these animals don't have fear and don't have anxiety. It is illegitimate to say that adding on 10%, 20% more pain and anxiety means that their side, it's legitimate for us to be putting animals through the amount of pain and amount of anxiety. No one on opposition can stand up and tell you that animals do not feel pain, that they do not worry, that they do not feel anxiety. There are videos of female cows and they zoom in and it looks like she's sad that her kid is taken away from her. We can't know. Do you know how we can know? If she can tell us. Maybe they're not very maternal. Maybe they don't like their sons. Maybe cows turn around and go, fine, take them. But we can't know until you hear. Last thing on self-defense and understanding of oppression. Opening opposition thus far have said that there are certain amounts of inequality and the main thing is animals live to survive, i.e. their prey and all the stuff that they said. First of all, go back to what I said about savages to survive, i.e. maybe lions don't want to kill gazelles, they just have to. But secondly, I want to say that self-defense and understanding of oppression is the only way that you have any chance of changing that pain. Weirdly enough, rats are probably the biggest group in this debate. Like there's just millions of rats underneath us at all points, right? Even in the most basic level, at the point where they can articulate or understand, they are likely to at least be reasoned with. They are likely to, even if it means we come to an agreement where you live in one area and we live in another area, maybe everybody shares this planet in a little bit more harmony. We don't start inflicting pain and horribleness on things that do not deserve it and currently are going through it. I beg you to propose.
I would like to welcome Diallo here.
Open government is correct. Animals currently do feel pain. We never disagreed on that. There may also be, at least in some species of animals, some degree of fear and anxiety. Our claim was not that that pain did not exist, but it increases significantly as a result of giving animals cognition. I want to talk about several things in this speech. First, I want to look at advocacy and explain still why the treatment of animals gets worse. And secondly, I want to look at the principal questions, particularly on self-defense and moral equivalence, and explain why those fall on our side of the house. Just one note before I get into that. What we told you from the very start is that we do think that we should reduce the amount of pain. They seem to believe they are able to do so. There is certainly a level of pain for animals, but here's one very important thing. Well, in most cases, humans do not have direct control over what is occurring between animals. It is not a case where there's a human governance structure or even one with capacity limitations we believe that currently exist that we think are likely to be put in place. And as a result, there will be a lot of pain on animal violence under either side of the house. On our side of the house, you increase the cost and actual harm to animals because of that. That was never responded to. And I do think it's important if you think about the amount of animal interactions which will occur structurally without human interaction. So let's first talk about the treatment of animals. There's a couple of claims which we made on this, we just don't think they respond to. The first is that animals harm other animals. That is partially because of their desires, and it's partly because of their violent tendencies. The strongest response we get to this, partially from open government, but we think could potentially be extended as the day goes on, is that maybe your sense of morality can change. Maybe that lion doesn't need the antelope. But I'm unclear why this would actually occur. Even in the best case scenario, let's say they have a similar trajectory to human beings, became intelligent about 2 million years ago. The kinds of pains inflicted on other human beings on a huge level exist even to this day. We have more slaves now than we ever had before. It is unclear why morality will evolve. But the second reason is the way in which morality does evolve. And this looks at human behavior. And it would also apply to animals, but now look specifically at humans. Often, injustice itself and violence against other individuals is distributional. It helps some people and harms other people. That should be obvious in cases like slavery, where injustice helps that slave owner. Why is that relevant in this case? Even the world as we see right now, that you effectively see, for instance, slave labor, very low paid labor, you see the crimes, the harms being committed by climate change, and there's not doing a great deal about it. Why do those continue? Because of the economic interest of some individuals to do it. And this is important, exactly as we hear the Prime Minister's speech, there's the ability to create mental justifications for that crime being permitted. So we have an interest and then we create a justification around it. What could those justifications be? That could be the justification, a benevolent justification. Let's go for the most positive one. That look at the savannah of Africa, look at the problems animals are facing themselves. And what is the conclusion of this when they're living in the state of nature? It is to subjugate them more, to take them out of their natural environment. And this is important because there's two potential responses they suggest. One is to treat them better. That's possible in some cases. The other one would be to use our own interest, will often be to continue to treat them badly, but to justify it as something which is worth doing. If you don't buy the plausible, just think about the narratives like white man's burden, which were created for economic reasons and become very plausible in that case.
Right.
So what that means then is that if we still think it is in our interest, exactly as Naomi shows, to subjugate animals, we can easily create a justification around it. Why does what are their responses to this? They will say that, well, you can advocate for your potential interest. A couple notes on this. One of the fallacies I think we're getting from the entire proposition is the use of the term animal here. Animals are giant species. Many animals will have very different interests. So, for instance, a cute animal, a panda, which people like, might find that it's better under human captivity. Other animals simply will not feel that way. They'll be far more averse to the destruction of the environment. There is not a unified interest of animals and often an antagonistic interest amongst animals. That is important in these cases because I think if their interests are not unified, I'm not even sure what level of advocacy they want to support. Let's now move on to the principle, but there's open.
Okay, so if it's on animal, increased cognition and ability to verbalize means they themselves can come up with systems, as we told you, to interact with one another. And equally, pandas might be different to lions. Women are different to men. You can advocate separately.
I mean, of course you can advocate separately, but who are you advocating to? The first thing is you could be advocating to humans. You also think you can advocate to other animals. Why are they going to listen when it's actively in their interest to destroy you? That's the point about how you can create self-justifying cycles. Let's move on to the principle. The strongest principle the government wants to raise is this claim of self-defense. What I want to claim is that what they call self-defense is often actually hate speech. It is the ability of animals to actually verbalize their violent tendencies and what they actually want to do. That could be the prey, say, violent lions are ultimately violent. The antelope are inferior. It is unclear that when you have the ability to verbalize, that is actually not creating more hatred towards groups, and that is in and of itself harmful. Secondly, I'm not even sure this absolute principle of self-defense should work when actively increase the harm to individuals. What they're effectively saying up front is that this is not instrumental. Do you actually believe that irrespective of potential outcomes, governments around the world should be arming all rebel groups? Probably not, because the harms here are again massively distributional. Some individuals could be harmed so much more than others. I do not accept the idea that self-defense should be treated as non-instrumental. I actually don't think of the status quo we do if you look at government policies here. The second claim we want to make is maybe there's some moral equivalence here, that animals are going to be the same as human beings. Obviously, once you have this policy, they are much more like human beings. But I don't think that is true under the status quo. It's why we don't think we need to grant their personhood. That is partially because they don't have the self-awareness. But it's partially because they aren't going to be reflective on their own desires the way human beings can. So animals and humans will have desires, when the important differences can be reflected on those desires and change those desires. A big difference between these two cases. And that is why I just don't think they're equivalent in these cases. But even if you believe they are, I'm not sure that advocacy would work because partially because the way humans respond to it, and partially just because of their capacity. Do you believe that ants actually have the ability, unlike weakness, to protest? Do you have the technology or the semiconductors, for instance, to be able to access other individuals and be able to advocate for your rights and communicate across borders? I'm utterly unclear why that would be the case and why you would potentially have that power to actually make those changes. So I don't think this ends up being an act of self-defense. I think it ends up being an act overall. What is true at the end of this debate? Yes, it is true that there's harm right now. That harm increases significantly. Animal versus animal violence, even if it doesn't increase, as we've already suggested it would, creates a problem. It creates problems in terms of the way humans respond to it. It creates more general ecosystem harms, and we don't think this is principally justified. We're very happy to oppose.
I think we'll open the welcome member of both.
Is everyone ready? Go. I'll start in 3, 2, The problem with the side of opening opposition is that they seem to believe that not being able to understand your pain is a better way to deal with your pain. They fail to understand that there is a difference between experience and conceptualization. Both teams on top have agreed that animals currently feel fear, anxiety, pain, etc. Opening opposition seems to assume that the only way in which this conceptualizing this would be a good thing is they're able to successfully combat their oppression. I would claim, going beyond opening government, this is not necessary. The very idea that you can conceptualize patterns of your oppression, that you can realize why and when it's going to happen and predict it, allows you multiple elements of dealing with that oppression that currently do not exist and are able to alleviate that pain. Multiple levels there. Firstly, animals can communicate common experiences and organize and rebel, which is to say they're able to understand they have a most proximate issue, a most proximate enemy who is deforesting their territory, acidifying their oceans, etc., which means also that they're able to overcome the difference in interests between them currently. But also know that Naomi herself concedes that animals have a bigger capacity to attack us. Animals are quite ingenious, even at a far level, lower level of intelligence than humans. Japanese bees are able to swarm around a hornet and literally burn it. Ants have incredibly detailed colonies. We study them for their organization. Now, note what happens when we raise them to our level of intelligence, but also add their physical capacities, their agility, their speed, etc. Which is to say they will be able to rebel and fight against us. Even if they're not able to defeat the humans, they're going to be able to create a short-lived enclave like the Paris Commune. This very idea that for a small piece of time you were liberated is something that is different to the concepts of pain you felt before, and therefore, because you can compare to the previous disability you had, this is something that people revel in, even if it ultimately fails. We've seen people throughout the history of society taking moral joy in dying for things like liberty, dying for things like freedom, dying for things like ideology. History disproves opening opposition insofar as what people did when they were colonized is that they rebelled against their colonizers. They didn't stay in their chains and be so nihilist and sad, even at the point where those rebellions failed, because they found joy in the idea that this at some point they might be free. But even if not, first of all, this gives them hope. The idea that you might fight back, that you might organize, gives you purpose to live until tomorrow, as opposed to the constant anxiety that tomorrow your calf might be taken away from you, because that's what happened before, but you don't know why, which is to say you're able to have a more stable relationship with your existence. Poor people hope they will get out of poverty, even though they might not. Secondly, a sense of commonality, connecting to other animals around you by talking about your oppression, by talking about your experiences, uniting around that and forming political societies. But thirdly, culture, songs, poems, stories about the fight that you had, sharing the experiences that you had. This means that there are going to be shared moments of commonality between those animals, which allow them to make friends, which allow them to access romantic relationships, which allow them to feel love in the way that humans do. Most of our lives are sad. Most of the time, because we tend to be poor. There tends to be hate speech against us as opening opposition. Notice, people who love tend to die, but they still tend to prefer life over non-existence because we have those elements of purpose. The comparative is that animals still feel pain, anxiety, and fear, but they don't know what the fuck to do with it. On our side, they know what the fuck to do with it. And that's why we efficiently rebut opening opposition and extend over opening government. But secondly, and more importantly, we are going to claim, and I need my paper very quickly, but there is a massive benefit to cooperation between humans and animals. And this is also going to be a very huge warrant for why humans are likely to cooperate with animals as opposed to waging war on them or subjugating them. Humans have the biggest technological capacity of all species in the world. The problem is they very often lack information as to how to resolve urgent issues that they face. This information is uniquely possessed by animals. There's a huge amount of things animals can tell us that we currently simply don't know. Ants, for example, can tell us about the composition of the soil. They can tell us where to dig for minerals such that we minimize pollution and we don't dig weirdly enough to cause earthquakes in Romania, for example, as Miri told me. Fish can tell us about ocean acidification. Humans don't know the tipping points of it and very often realize a posteriori. Fish feel it directly as pain and therefore can communicate on time so we can resolve those things. Animals live in deeper symbiosis with the ecosystem. They have experientially come into contact with the fact that when a certain tree dies out, when a certain species has a bad year with reproduction, the entire ecosystem goes into instability. Humans don't have that kind of direct access and therefore we lag when it comes to engaging with ecosystems and restoring them. They can tell us about diseases. Look, these are things that we get sick of. Like, for example, COVID. At the point where we know how much threats lie in those ecosystems, we're less likely to want to deforest because we know those viruses can come into our society. Which is to say, animals can give us information that directs our large technological potential to resolving the urgent issues of the present time. Stuff like climate change, which literally affects all species and is probably going to be irreversible in 40 or 50 years. We need the information to act urgently. This is the warrant as to why we are going to cooperate, because we and animals have a mutual interest. We have an interest that's fluoride that doesn't go underwater. The animals have an interest, their habitats are not deforested and they're not forced into extinction. The same thing happened in human society. Humans started off as predators, but as they realized that they have complementary skills and that cooperating on those skills helps them survive, we turn from predators into animals of commonality. The same thing happens when we give this capacity of communication here. Note that, okay, before I talk about the status quo, take Hamza in fact.
By the same logic of self-defense, don't these animals have an incentive to lie?
Why would they lie? Because if they lie, they don't give us the information, also saves them. They don't have the technology to resolve climate change, opening opportunities. We do, but they have the information. Lying directly puts them in a problematic position. But notice status quo. There's already a huge push towards animal rights, a huge amount of young progressive individuals voting for green parties. The EU directly legislating to stop things like factory farming, a vast amount of R&D into vegan lifestyles because people dig that kind of shit. Now we can combine that narrative with the narrative of instrumentality. Animal rights activists get another huge argument. You might not want to cooperate with animals. You might think they're worse than you might think they're tasty, but you'll die if you don't cooperate with them. It's actually fucking useful to cooperate as opposed to trying to colonialize them or whatever. But this also gives a specific form of leverage to animals, right? Because they can withhold information. At this point, we cannot access the knowledge that animals have, but at the point where we try to subjugate them, they will withhold the information because they can literally blackmail us with their own existence. But at the point where they see a human willingness to cooperate with them, that's the point where there's a mutual interest in communicating that information on both sides of the house. The weighing of this argument is the following. It is literally the largest argument in the debate on scale because it provides potential to save the largest possible amount of species. Secondly, it is a warrant as to why humans will accept animal advocacy and drive for some form of cooperation, which is the prerequisite of the opening government case. But they also add an independent argument which explains that even if animals cannot throw off their oppression, the ability to conceptualize their lives adds utility as opposed to the present disutility which both companies have been conceived. So we extend on that independently as well. For all those reasons, closing government.
I remember both from my speech, both of them were just clear.
If a lion could speak, it would not understand you. I'm going to do two things in this speech. First, I'm going to talk a bit about CG, and second, I'm going to talk nonsense for 6 minutes so that Hamza can backload. The first thing, let's talk about the two arguments that come out of closing gov. The first one is we get hope and we get moral joy because we can do like rebellion and lose in a day. The first thing over here is animals already have hope. They have joy and happiness in their lives. Like this argument presumes that animals are just fucking stupid and not able to experience emotions at all. The justification required in this argument is this marginal increase in hope and joy for a very short period of time is then something worth fighting for, given the fucking massive increase in trauma that you get recognizing not only histories of, by the way, oppression, but also your own inability to change fucking anything, which I will get to later on. The second thing that they say is, they're going to communicate and give you valuable knowledge. The first thing over here is, how long will it take for animals to acquire the same complex scientific ideas that we have? Cognition and language do not imply education and knowledge, which they do not have. The second thing is, if it is true that fish survive because they can exaggerate acidification levels in the ocean, I would just suggest that they fucking obfuscate all knowledge that you have about the ocean, because their own interest is in the short term survival. So if they can can tell you anything that might make them, survive. They'll probably lie to you, and this is probably bad for the planet. Okay, two things that I'm going to talk about. First, I'm going to talk about a bit on animal to animal violence, but I'm going to differentiate from opening opposition, which just says animals can be greedy and they have wants and they'll kill each other. But let's move on to animals killing humans. And the second thing I will talk about is existential dread, and also take it away from a bit. The first thing over here is recognizing what does having levels of human cognition and speech imply. Currently, animals have a certain degree of consciousness and some means of communication. What changes is that now these can be expressed in the status quo. These are expressed and exercised in terms of short-term strategies to ensure day-to-day survival. So resources are used to satisfy needs, not wants, as Hamza suggested in his BOI. What changes? And these are 4 things that change that I don't think OG really mentions. The first thing is animals recognize that resources are very scarce. Now, I know OG talked about how resources are scarce and therefore humans are going to kill animals. I would suggest that animals themselves also recognize that resources are scarce, and probably human beings are taking those resources away. The second thing is animals also recognize that there are other species within the food chain that are direct competitors in an environment of resource scarcity, and that they need to ensure long-term survival by accruing more resources. I.e., what changes is not ensuring that you have bananas for a day, but ensuring that you have bananas for the next 6 months so that your species at the very least survives, which is something that animals currently do not do. The third thing that changes is that animals recognize that human beings are technologically superior, difficult to win against, and unlikely to listen because the rights frameworks used by human beings are fundamentally different to any understanding of rights that animals have right now. So human beings will not listen. So as opposed to opening opposition, which says animals might go, or opening government generally exchange, say animals might fight against humans, I would posit that animals would probably rationally not want to fight against humans. They would much rather fight against themselves so that they can accrue these resources much more easily and much more quicker, because it might take a lot of time, as O suggested, to even go and convince human beings. Now, the last thing is, as Tin also says, they now have the ability to organize, communicate, and strategize as never before. What does this lead to? I would suggest that we will now see levels of violence in the animal kingdom that we have never ever fucking seen before. Sit down. No, thank you. I'll take opening later. The first thing is this amplifies resource-based competition. So cognition and speech do not imply the existence of rights-based frameworks. Hunter-gatherers mentioned by OG, we took like millennia to fucking do it. But imagine the levels of violence that happen in between. So in terms of this, I would suggest, and this is the crucial link that I don't think OO makes, which is resource-based competition will happen, but what we have not done is equalize physical capacities between animals. Some animals tend to be stronger than others, i.e. there are loads of fucking animals just by virtue of being fucking herbivores or down on the food chain that just get eaten at levels that we haven't seen before. Why is this important in comparison to everything we've heard in this round? The first thing is, this is a level of depth that the world has never seen before. So yes, opening or government can come up and say, we deserve the right to self-defense. The problem is, we have structurally not given lots of species the means to defend themselves. So the right to self-defense is fucking useless at the point at which you can do nothing with that self-defense. And the second thing is, you have manifestly increased pain in the entire world to a level never seen before. The third thing I would point out is, this also makes humans more afraid. Look at how human beings talk about poor neighborhoods, where they say, these people are just fucking violent. And they tie that to evidence of violence within these neighborhoods by saying these are high crime places. Imagine you as a human community recognizing that there are levels of violence in the animal kingdom that you have never seen before. I would suggest that the human response is not understanding, it is fucking fear. And I would suggest that this leads to a level of war against animals that we have never seen before. This means using armaments against animal species that are probably not going to listen to you. Now, O over here says animals can negotiate. First of all, as I pointed out, animals experientially are very different. The language, like I use English very differently to how Hamza uses English, to how other people do use English. The experiences we have are very different. To negotiate, there needs to be some level of common experiences. But secondly, I would also point out, and more importantly, it is, even if we understand them, it does not mean we empathize. Ask people of color, ask women. They have been able to say that they are feeling pain for millennia. Things have taken a long while to change. So in that moment, we will probably, as a first resort to ensure our own survival, do this. I'll take opening.
You can't just say it took millennia at first to do it. Animals have tribes, families, lives, communities. They coalesce together already.
Yes.
They also have examples of humans in front of them. We speak different English, but I can fucking understand you.
I agree, but I do not think lions are vegan. Next thing, and this is probably more important. Is it just a physical necessity? They are obviously going to have others. Next thing, existential dread. Now, opening opposition talks about animals probably feeling pain and freedom. I would suggest that the vast majority of animals, as Naomi suggests, have not experienced human oppression, but just by virtue of where they live. And here's where we go beyond the discussion of animals being oppressed. I would suggest, and let's just take an example of a beetle. It's a small fucking creature. Human beings really don't give a fuck about it. They don't really have the time to oppress it. This is a creature which has limited physical capacities, but now has cognition and language to a level never seen before. Imagine being this creature, realizing that you are always going to be on the bottom of the food chain just by virtue of how you're born and what your fucking digestive habits are. And the second thing is that you can change nothing because of those physical capacities. I would say that there is an overwhelming sense of dread amongst the vast majority of animals that can do nothing about the situation that they are in. This is a level of epistemic violence that we have never seen before. Very proud to oppose.
I thank the member for my speech for the longer here.
I think the reason why these debates are usually complicated for Gov is because we all have the tendency to argue for a new world through the lens of the world as it exists right now. In order for this motion to work, you need to give both government teams enough fiat to imagine that what the new world would look like would not simply be a continuation of status quo as it looks right now, simply with extra cognition placed on animals, but you also have to give us enough fiat to at least try to conceptualize, and this goes for you up as well, to try to conceptualize the fact that as these animals gain cognition and powers of speech to the levels of humans, they will probably use them in the same way that humans have used them throughout history. Our burden on government is not to say that tomorrow that world will be perfect or even better, because if that were our burden, this motion could not possibly work, right? And if you want to say that this generation that is alive right now is more important than all future generations, that is a case you could have made. I'm sure there's many risks why you could have explained. It's probably not going to be the case that millions and billions of generations will exist, but it's not the case anyone actually gave you. So panel, as you judge this debate, please keep in mind that our burden is not to show that today's generation will look better in this world, but that overall, it is a better world if we do this, because we have to take into account that there will be millions and potentially billions of generations, potentially infinity, if you listen to long-termists, right? So you cannot compare level 2023 humanity with level -2 million animal kingdom and say, ha ha, we got you, right? Because humans didn't used to know how to speak different languages, but we still learn to do that. Am I going to be able to communicate with a lion tomorrow? No. Tin, however, explains you that there are probably reasons why both me and the lion are going to have the incentive to fucking try. So maybe if you want to prove that that's impossible, you should give actual arguments rather than saying, ha, but right now it's not happening because animals are so different. That's the point. It's not happening because they're so different, but from tomorrow, they'll be less different and we can start learning to cooperate, right? I'm glad CEO acknowledges we learn to empathize with people who think, speak, look differently. Like, yes, I acknowledge we're not perfect in doing that with humans as well. I'm just saying it's so much fucking better than 300 years ago when we thought Black people aren't even humans and don't feel the same things as we do. And because we were able to tell ourselves that, we were able to justify more and more atrocities. Are we still going to look for reasons why we think we're superior to animals? Sure. And some people still look for reasons to think they're superior to gays. It's just that the vast majority of people are not going to have such an easy time to do that. So it's going to keep getting better, right? The thing is that if I put a chicken in front of every single one of you, I'm not sure if there's a single person in this room who would be able to look at the chicken suffering as you strangle it to death and continue with it, because we are not wired to enjoy causing pain, right? CO themselves and even OO say the reason you do that is because you kind of have to, right? Because you fear the unknown. And that's also the reason why humans also used to go to war, and now we go to war less and less. We can still indoctrinate soldiers by telling them that the others are stupid and less than human and whatever. It's just much harder at the moment where we've reached an understanding that other humans, even if they don't look like us or speak our language also have feelings the same that we do, and we should probably care. I'm unsure why that's not going to apply to animals. It's going to take a long time. I know that. However, given that there are already humans who care about animals even without animals having cognition, because we are able to recognize that things like cortisol and things like fear happen, and that's pain we should care about. I genuinely think that if we make humans realize that that animals are actually capable of having the same condition as us, I genuinely think eventually we're gonna get to the point where we'll treat them better. Opening.
So some animals may currently feel fear, some degree of it.
Yeah.
They can, many probably don't, and they probably feel more.
Yeah.
Maybe there's hope. There's also hopelessness.
Yeah.
And you can always get mineral information from them. You can also get like information from mining.
Can you get to the
and
point?
with a car. So, all of it.
All right, look, Tin has explained to you that yes, experience is, however, not the same as conceptualization. I think this is also the reason why we take it over our opening. And the reason for that is because if you conceptualize patterns of oppression, it can help you solve suffering. Maybe you perceive it as worse as you understand what is happening, but it also gives you more avenues to deal with it rather than just fear and duck, right? Because if you learn to recognize the patterns of fear coming, that also means that in the moments where there's no warning sign around you, you also learn what it's like to maybe feel safe during the night and maybe enjoy the time around the campfire or whatever it is that tribes did before they learn to feel safety, right? You have commonality and community, you find relief and empathy. A lot of humans live quite miserable lives right now because they are living in like subsistence farmers in poverty. However, their lives are still meaningful because their ability to free themselves of the pain is not the only thing that makes up their experience. It's also the fact that you learn to live with it, you learn to do something about it, and the pursuit of doing something about it is something that distracts you from the momentary pain because there's a reasonable chance that you might be able to get rid of that pain. That's something they never engage with, and I'm sure they're going to backload. Please don't let them get away with that, right? Here's the thing. The burden is not to say you're going to be able to solve all pain, clearly not. However, the fact that you even conceptualize that you have other avenues to deal with it gives you a distraction from just feeling your pain all the fucking time, because that's all you're capable of, right? Unfortunately, printing the effective altruism forum is not something I thought of to case file, so I don't have the exact numbers, but the land animals that are being farmed are genuinely millions of times more than all of the insect and all of the wild animals. There are literal trillions of fish that are being farmed in conditions where they can barely breathe, like their entire lives is spent feeling the feeling of asphyxiation because of the dissolved oxygen in the poor water. Those are a lot of fucking animals, even if you think that it's just one species of fish. Actually, there's like millions of species of fish, but that aside, right? So the scale of the suffering is already happening, even if you would say that, but it's less than a human could feel, by the sheer numbers of many more times animals that are being farmed than humans alive, that is so much more suffering that exists. But also on why there are incentives to cooperate. Note, animals don't have to start developing science from scratch. They just need to start cooperating with us. Tim gave you a lot of analysis on why we would have the incentive to cooperate with animals, because they can give us good information. I think fish would have the incentive to not lie to us when they'll tell us how to stop destroying their habitat, because if we destroy their habitat, they die. Sure, they die first before we die, but we both want the same thing, to keep the planet inhabitable for living beings, right? Sure, we are not yet at the point where you can give cultivated meat to every lion, but probably the reason for that is because the entire industry of cultivated meat has had like a total of 3 billion poured into it for 20 years. We're already at the point where you can get it in every Western supermarket cheaper than beef. Imagine if every animal that is alive right now would have human cognitive power. You wouldn't need to pay it a salary because it would have the incentive of not being hunted. It works for free, helps you develop everything you fucking need to make the planet more friendly for everyone. I genuinely think CG wins this weird debate.
I think we'll go for my speech for number 28.
For people who are watching on the live stream, go back to sleep. Why are you doing this? Like, this is
That's only listening, so it's even worse.
That last speech was like something out of the Flintstones, right? Like, animals work for free. You have a pelican which makes cement, a dinosaur which takes you places. And their main incentive for doing this, by the way, is because they want to work together with you. Let's think about this one thing that will kill all of us that we should work together on. It's called climate change. And the reason that we have something called the collective action problem is because the individual gain that we accrue by not cooperating is significantly higher than the individual benefit that we accrue by cooperating. Imagine that now happening for not 8 billion humans and animals. Let's simplify this. Imagine there were 500 billion humans on the planet. That's effectively what we're thinking of, right? Because these are people who have human level capacities of cognition and speech. You now have 500 billion human beings on the planet who you now have to work with to resolve for problems that we can't get 8 billion of people on the same page on, with everything from pandemics to climate change to whatever else that would kill us. I just don't think the commonality and cooperation argument makes sense from closing government insofar as it belies the vast majority of experience that humans have had, politically speaking, in terms of our tragedy of the commons. I'm going to do a few things in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to look at what Taha brought to make sure that people don't keep thinking that I'm backloading. And then secondly, I'm going to make it engage with the rest of the round. First, I think Taha does a fantastic job of saying and pointing out the simple fact of animals are different. And when you're a beetle and something else is a lion, and you're just a fucking beetle, that existence can be very dreadful. This is why Franz Kafka wrote Metamorphosis. The entire intuition is that if you live your life as a beetle, it's hard to live your life in a world that's not made for you. It's not tailor-made to your fit. What that means then is that your physical capacities don't align with your cognitive capacities. So unlike opening opposition, which is contingent on violence, mistreatment, all of that stuff, we're just saying the very fact that you can cognitively recognize that you are a beetle is bad enough for you, because with the exception of primates and a few other animals, most animals do not have the locomotive and motor skill and physical capacities to roam around in the world in whatever way they see fit, right? In other words, our cognitive has catched up with our physical in a way that's not true for the vast majority of animals on this planet. I think this sets up a recipe for depression, anxiety, and psychological trauma that's completely independent of treatment and interaction amongst animals and amongst humans. I think that's a claim that stands independent of that. But secondly, I think Taha does a great job of saying, once you shift from wanting something instinctively to wanting something conceptually, you want to accrue gains. The point at which you want to accrue gains, because you're now thinking long-term, you're now thinking prospectively, you're now thinking preemptively, is the point at which you realize that in a resource-scarce world, the best thing to do is to take everything and keep it for yourself. If the intuition is true from opening government, closing government, that these animals have ties and kinship networks and tribes and all of that stuff, if I were the most powerful animal on the animal kingdom, I would just take everything, right? Which is an intuition I currently do not have because of my biological programming, because my biological programming preordains that I only take what little I need, and then I will take it next time because I don't think long-term, which means A, resources deplete. 2, the level of violence that goes up is insane, because lions are not just killing animals now because they need to eat them. Lions are killing them because they hate them and also want to take the tiger's food away, which means then that the level of violence is exponentially higher, independent of any interaction with humans, independent of any mistreatment that happens from human society, as opening opposition claim. I think that's really important. But thirdly, Taha uniquely adds that you become much more afraid of these animals when you watch this escalation in violence. How does this interact with the rest of the round? Firstly, I think opening government's argument from rights and advocacy makes sense insofar as you can first prove that these animals can cooperate amongst themselves. I think that's a critical mechanism there. If these animals can't do that, then it's unclear to me why they can A, advocate, and 2, vouch for their rights. These animals, as Taha show you, will just be killing amongst themselves to make sure that they have what little humans have left them over the last 2,000 years, much less go around and create complex systems of political organization. But the second thing that they miss in their argument about rights and advocacy is that the difference between, a white person and a black person was the amount of melanin that they have in their skin. The difference between a beetle and a lion is so exponentially, insanely different versus an elephant versus a panda versus whatever whatever it might be. It's unclear to me how any human level intuition applies because we're all fundamentally more or less the same people. It's unclear to me why these animals come together and advocate for their rights and advocate for their welfare insofar as it requires you to cooperate, which requires empathy, which requires cooperation, which requires community, which I don't think occurs. I'm going to take opening government.
This case is justification for people living in disability who are women in a rural bill for able-bodied men to does not exist. It ignores the impact of advocacy, connection, understanding, and the ability to solve your own oppression that we bring you. You can advocate, maybe not perfectly, but it's better than being hunted.
Yeah, but Lucy, like, you know, my aunt's in a wheelchair, but she's not a panda. And I think that's the intuition I'm trying to make, which is like, it's hard for you to understand how fundamentally distinct animals can be from amongst each other. That is fundamentally different from someone having a lower IQ or a higher EQ or having a physical disability or being in a coma. I just think the intuition gap there is very, very different. But secondly, I think it's also very important to understand the argument from living an ethical life, which opening government wants to do through self-defense, also has to on some level realize that that ethical existence is presupposed on outcomes, right? If your life is consistently going to be just shit, you being ordained the right of self-defense is not a moral right, in my opinion, right? Like if you go to a conflict zone and like tell some incredibly oppressed community, which you know for several generations will live in a life of slavery and tragedy, hey, by the way, there's this thing called agency. I think you're being horrible to those people. I genuinely think so. And this is a huge part of mental health ethics in conflict zones, what you tell people and what you don't tell people. I think the analogy also equally applies here insofar as you're putting them in an environment where self-defense is ineffective, but you're telling them that it's morally just and necessary. On closing government then, a couple of things. First, Miri's argument, time. Enough time will pass such that we will change our ways. What has happened during that time, I ask? So when Pizarro and the Incans occurred, or when colonialism occurred, it wasn't just like we were running the clock. Entire races and species of people were completely fucking wiped out from the planet. Cultures were destroyed. If you use that analogy here, again, keeping in mind the fundamental difference that I have pointed out between several animals and animals from humans, several species will be wiped out. Several animals will die. Fundamental things about this universe will change. And yes, maybe in a few millennia, we live in a world of perfect equality, somehow on one planet with 500 billion human beings now. We take it over opening opposition panel because we showed you that we are compounding the pain of these people, A, through the psychological trauma, but two, the resource scarcity problem that now exists, which exponentially increases the animal-on-animal violence and also makes humans much more frightened of the existence of animals. I'm very, very proud to report.
I think for my speech along for a great debate, this is a close one from to either of us after the break is announced. Go ahead and pick up. I've just seen someone saying pizza on this word.
At 11.
At 11, which is
Eat that,
Go
happen.